Hello, I'm John Feldt, and this is the Blue Water Outlook Weekly Water Outlook recorded on May 12, 2013. Well, here's the precipitation that fell over the last 7 days. Areas in green indicate precipitation generally from about a ½ inch up to 1.5 inches. Yellow is the heavier rain, around 2 inches. And you can see that these trends we've been talking about for the last month, the more active parts of the nation from Iowa up into Wisconsin, and then a second area from Missouri up towards the east and maybe northeast, that remained active. But it wasn't nearly as active as we've seen over the last several weeks where we had much heavier amounts and more widespread rain. It's been a lot more scattered as far as the heavier precipitation. And we see that in the percent of normal over the last week. We see not a real cohesive pattern over most of the middle part of the nation. We see some areas above normal and below normal, very close to one another. We see that in Iowa. And that's generally a sign of spring. We don't have as much organization. Now take a look at the upper Midwest, the well below normal precipitation over parts of North Dakota and northern Minnesota. No rain fell at all in that area, thus percent of normal is 0 for the last 7 days. Now, the story over the last number of months have been areas that are wet are getting wetter, areas that are dry are getting drier. These are percentiles of soil moisture, and what you can see here, especially the areas of dark green and blue, these are areas that are very wet, and those are areas vulnerable for increased runoff, vulnerable for soggy soils. Then we get in this transition zone here, and this is where soil moisture is fairly close to normal. We've seen some improvement over the winter months from the drought impacts. Then we get further to the west, and we begin to get into the reduced amounts of soil moisture. But even in those areas, there's been some significant relief over the winter months, even though rain is still needed in those areas. As far as stream flow goes, you can see areas in blue, that's above normal, areas of black, well above normal, areas in green, normal, and areas of red, below normal. And that corresponds very closely to those areas of soil moisture and past precipitation. Areas that have been wet, soils are also saturated. You're going to get more runoff. Rivers are going to be running high. I didn't think I'd be talking much about snow, and I think this will be the last week I talk about snow for the season. But you can see that Colorado did receive a significant snow over the last week. Now, areas in orange are areas of significant melting, so now even well into Canada we're getting very significant melting. And the snowpack right now, this is a snow cover, other than a couple little isolated spots in northern Minnesota and higher elevations of the Rockies, there's no snow on the ground anywhere. And with the trend I'm going to be talking about in this briefing, you're going to see I don't really expect any snow other than maybe some lingering snow in the higher elevations. Now, due to the rainfall and the saturated soils, we still have some flooding issues going on, but rivers for the most part are receding over the upper reaches, and now flood stream is working downstream. Take note of the areas in red and purple. Those are the higher locations, moderate flooding, red, purple, major flooding. But the crests have now passed most areas, and I really don't see enough precipitation into the immediate future that would bring the crest any higher. So I really think we've seen our flood event for this year. Now, this is the current jet stream pattern. I talk a lot about the jet stream. I talk a lot about the medium range outlooks here. And to do that, I have to look at the jet stream pattern aloft, because that's really steering and shaping our precipitation. So what we've had here is we've had this really pesky northwest flow. We've had occasionally that closed low. And that area of low pressure, the dipping of the jet stream, has brought cooler temperatures over most of the Midwest for quite some time now. And that's really shaped both precipitation trends, and it's been enhanced precipitation in the form of rain or snow with this type of pattern, and it's been cooler than normal temperatures. Now, it's been a long time, but we are going to be seeing a very significant change over this week and continuing into next week as well. So let's take a look at the jet stream early this week. The shaded areas are the enhanced amounts of energy, or the stronger winds. The red is the core of the jet stream, and look how far north it shifts very early this week by Tuesday. This is that area of low pressure, that trough here, shifts off to the east, and it really pushes the jet stream well to the north over the far northern tier of the U.S. So very broad areas of the Midwest are now going to be south of that jet stream, and that's going to bring warmer temperatures, and it's going to bring quieter conditions over most of the Midwest. Actually, if we look at late this week, very late this week on Friday, not only is the jet stream still well to the north, it's also diminishing in intensity, so there's not going to be as much atmospheric energetics to cause precipitation. So both of these patterns, with the jet shifting to the north and the weakening of the jet, it looks like a fairly quiet period for the Midwest most of this week. Now, if we look at next week, I'm going to be talking about a little bit further out, 6 to 10 day. These purple lines here are zero anomalies, and that's basically saying over the 6 to 10 day period, green is the jet stream, is that the jet stream is going to generally average close to normal. That means it's probably going to dip down a little bit further south. That means it's probably going to give an enhanced amount of precipitation on week 2. Right now, I'm not all that impressed with this pattern. I think there will be some increased precipitation, but right now it might not be all that enhanced as far as what models at least indicate. I wanted to put it in perspective, how far north the jet stream is going to be. And if you look at this cluster of all these little squiggly lines, these are all the individual model runs pushing it up over the northern tier of the U.S. The green is where it normally would be climatology this time of year as we get into early and mid-May. What you see here is that the jet stream is unusually far north this week compared to where it would normally be. So let's look at some of the precipitation trends and patterns and forecasts. For the Midwest, I did put a full 7-day precipitation forecast here, but I want to emphasize that this is late in the week. There could be some scattered precipitation throughout the week, but this is generally the heavier and more organized precipitation is late this week as that jet begins to sort of maybe undulate a little bit further to the south once again. Right now, I think when you get this far out, there's a lot of uncertainty. I certainly wouldn't get real confident on these amounts or where they're going to occur, but really up until late this week, it looks pretty quiet. Soil moisture forecast change is also generally going to be drying out over almost all of Iowa, Nebraska, most of Wisconsin except for the north, and most of Illinois. And in this area, it can definitely use somewhat of a drying. So between the enhanced evapotranspiration or the evaporation, depending on the progress of crops, and the warming temperatures, that should give some significant drying to these areas that have been fairly wet. Wanted to look out a little bit further on precipitation. This is a climate model. On the top is week 1, and look at that very dry signal that I've been talking about. Now it does flip-flop on week 2, and that's that jet stream sagging south a bit. Now we're going to have to see how strong this means in week 2. Does this mean a repeat of the widespread heavy rain or just more scattered, modest type precipitation? Right now, looking at the jet stream, I think it's more the modest scattered precipitation that sort of offsets the evaporation. So we're not really net gain one way or the other. So right now, we're going to have to see how that goes. And this is another model run, and this goes all the way through May 28th. And I did want to sort of point out here that, even though week 1 looks dry, and then as we get into week 2, more modest precipitation, it does look like even from a national perspective, this area from Iowa up into Wisconsin and then surrounding states, Missouri, northern Illinois, that still is the area that is somewhat vulnerable to being wet as we get out towards the end of May. Again, this is very far out there, but I did want to say that that is that area that looks pretty wet if these patterns would develop, and it could be 2 to 4 inches of rain as we get into the latter part of the month. So the takeaway points from this week's briefing: the upper low impacts will be diminishing after impacting our region for quite some time. Jet will be lifting to the north, which will mean warmer and quieter conditions for the first week here, and then perhaps an increase in precipitation on week 2, and I will be keeping an eye on that. Now, I will be issuing information throughout the week. Looks like a very quiet week, but I still will be putting some information out. And then it looks like another briefing will be coming again next weekend. I want to thank you for listening to this week's briefing, and have a nice week.